with the startup Pictura Bio, as we've already mentioned. So, could you tell us more about your experience of going from academic research environment to that of starting or going into a startup? And can you also briefly tell us what you're working on currently as of now?
Okay. So after my postdoc, my pathway has been a little bit of unplanned in some senses. Um, After my postdoc, during my postdoc, I definitely got into a little bit more things. So during my PhD, it was mostly about modeling, and I did mostly computational biology, where I was working on evolutionary microbiology, how bacteria evolve, particularly how they can work. Two bacteria which are like separate can cooperate with each other. In my postdoc, I moved to work with bacteriophages, and while doing that, I got into method development. So I worked with creating a protocol for using a pipetting robot to do the experiments. I also did some device development. So we had another student in the group who was working on developing like a device. So bacteria usually grows on these agar plates, right? But agar plate, if you just keep it for a while, bacteria grow, the nutrient finishes, and then it also dries up. So in order to do long-term experiments on solid surfaces, he was trying to develop a device where uh, media keeps on flowing below the agar. So that will keep on making the agar resupplied by nutrients. And that is like, so this is not microfluidics, but millifluidics. So in order for that, I made like a syringe pump, which is a custom syringe pump, which could be controlled by remote control from the computer. So I got into 3D printing, a little bit of hardware mechanics, and I kind of enjoy those bits of it, making new methods and technologies. So I wanted to kind of explore, but I did not really know how exactly to get into it because I had minimal experience. But I thankfully had a friend who was working in Oxford in another startup, and essentially through this networking, they found about another company, this Picture Bio, who was looking for somewhere to do a short-term project. So currently, they have their own technology setup, which is so Picture Bio mostly works on a rapid diagnostics platform, and their approach is to use microscopy. So they want to come up with a one-step assay which will make pathogens fluorescent, and then you can use microscopy to detect those pathogens and quickly say what kind of sample you have. So they are usually doing this with more sophisticated microscopy techniques such as super resolution microscopy and machine learning. But this is not going to be useful from a point of care perspective. Not everybody in the world will have the more access to sophisticated devices. So they wanted to explore on the other side, the point of care device, which is a cheap portable device. What can you do with a very simple microscope? So essentially, that's where I come in. And working with them, I am trying to look at developing a cheap and portable smartphone-based microscope. And we are kind of testing out what is the, say, resolution and things which we can get from this. How usable is it? Is this data good enough? Like, obviously, it's not going to be good enough to a very sophisticated machine, but what is it that we can get with it, and what kind of answers can we get from it? So essentially, we're exploring the market. So it's very preliminary studies on that space.
I would just like to shift the gears of the conversation a bit. Before starting before joining the startup, you briefly worked at the UK Civil Service for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, long for DEFRA, as a senior scientific officer. So, how did that come about, and what was that experience like?
Again, it was a bit of serendipity. So by the end of my postdoc, I was to some extent a bit saturated in the type of research I have been doing. So, so my PhD, towards the end of my PhD, there was COVID. So my original research ideas, which I had, did not really go in that direction. I had to change a little bit, and then I did this postdoc, and there was a sense of continuously doing things without taking any breaks because I essentially, in 2020, I was sick for a while. Then I somehow finished my thesis, submitted my thesis, and the next month I flew out to the UK to start this postdoc. I was saturated, I was tired, I wanted to do something different. Luckily, at that point of time, this new program had come about. So it was the Research and Development Fellowship Program by DEFRA. So their idea was to get different scientists of different expertise to come and work for the government for up to a year on multiple different kind of projects. So it was the first time that was happening. And since I wanted to break the monotony in the kind of research I was to do, I wanted to explore more. I applied for this one. I particularly said that I want to look at things which are more applied, which are not close to my expertise. So I did not apply for remediation or like environment or biological things. I asked for systems, innovations, and futures. That's what their section unit is called, which is more transformation of technology and application-oriented things. So I was selected and placed into this team called the Futures team, which was part of, again, the systems, innovations, and futures. As part of this, what their goal there was to look at, the futures teams looks at what are up and coming in the space. So and the DEFRA overall looks at multiple different things, not only of maintaining the ecological resources of the country, how economical advantages can be taken out of those things. So say how a forest can be used properly, what kind of crops should we adapt to, things like that. But there's also a component of biosecurity. So as the global climate is changing, in a country which is cold like the UK, there wasn't, say, a certain amount of some kind of insects could not grow here because it was not hot enough. But now that the weather is changing, certain other insects from across the world are like now able to survive here. They are creating certain amount of issues. Some plants are dying. Some other pathogens are coming into the environment. So you have to take care of what kind of, maybe you have to breed different kind of plants for that. You have to change your approach. How can you protect these? All of these potential things you have to look at. There's also so much of buzz around AI, and governments we know are like slower to kind of react to everything. So when there is a lot of conversation about AI changing everything, AI able to accelerate research, then their concern was what would be the effect of AI, particularly on biosecurity. There's a lot of conversation going on, particularly on biosecurity in terms of humans, because we recently passed through COVID. There were conversations about how there could be potentially lab leak hypothesis could have been there, how it could have been done partly due to human failure. So there were a lot of threats about like humans developing certain things and them coming into the wild, affecting other humans. But often plants and animals are not part of the equation. So the project I was given to was essentially to study what would be how biological research would be accelerated by AI, but particularly in the aspect of how that would affect plants and animals. What kind of biosecurity challenges would be in terms of plants and animals? Because humans are all being studied by other departments, they wanted to particularly look at that. So it was a policy-oriented project. It was a very different thing from anything I have done before. So, but it gave me a pretty good understanding of working in a very, very different environment. Civil service department is a huge, huge organization where you are a tiny part. There are lots of realities of something like working in the corporate kind of thing. Like you are a small cog in this large environment, and when you start off with a project which has such a large, massive goal, you do not know where to start from, where to end. It takes you a few months just to kind of talk to enough number of people to figure out what's going on, what do they already know, what do they do, what is their scope, and then kind of move around it. So in particular, this work was more literature survey in some senses. So I did a part of it was literature survey to read what's actually happening in the literature. So synthetic biology, engineering, evolution, and things like that. What are the latest research going on there, and how that can be used, particularly in terms of animals and plants. And the other part was how the AI tools are essentially making it easier to do this. So sequencing is there. You have technologies to genetically engineer organisms. There was often a gap in how you could know what you did was correct. What are the combinations of things you can do? Now you have AlphaFold to kind of figure out any sequence, what will be the protein which will be formed. So a lot of ways in which computationally you could accelerate your understanding, know what to expect, and can essentially translate it out in the lab. So the theory development part and the experiment development part could be kind of put together as a pipeline, and many things can be tested much faster. Also, just learning and understanding of these things, if you as a person get confused, you can probably ask a LLM to kind of explain it to you again. They may not be 100% correct, but if you give it enough information, you can essentially use it like a sounding board. Like when we discussed with your friends, and you may say something correct but wrong, but that conversation leads you to discover a better understanding. It's something like that. So all of these potential possibilities, all of these ways you can think about it, not in terms of science alone, but a societal understanding, because policy is a lot about society as well. How thought processes are shifting, concerns, and things about it. So it was me discovering lots of other aspects of science, which as a scientist you often tend to neglect, or you at least made to believe as if that doesn't matter. But beyond the lab, all of that matters. So that was a pretty good experience just to break free of that certain mindsets you make up, look at things from a new perspective, and then kind of decide which part of it did you like, which part of it I did not like. So I kind of took it that way. I felt like I do not think I will fit into that kind of a long-term project. But it was definitely a very good experience as an internship or a fellowship. Yeah.